It began in the burning silence of a battlefield above the dying world of Varela, where smoke and plasma fire stitched the night sky into ribbons of chaos. The Galactic Council had called it a limited engagement, but every soldier knew it was slaughter disguised as order. Among the wreckage, a single Terran dropship spiraled out of control, flames trailing like a comet across the heavens. Inside, Captain Marcus Hale fought to steady the controls, alarms screaming around him. The ship was breaking apart, systems failing, and the ground rushed up like a tidal wave. When it struck, everything went white. Hours later, through the thick haze of dust and ruin, Marcus awoke to the faint sound of weeping, soft, melodic, and distinctly alien. He dragged himself through the twisted metal, his armor cracked, blood drying on his skin. Then he saw her, a small figure pinned beneath a collapsed arch of crystal stone, her silver skin shimmering faintly beneath the firelight. Her eyes, wide with pain and fear, met his. She wasn't a soldier. She was a child. In that moment, Marcus didn't see an enemy. He saw someone helpless. He pulled himself forward, ignoring the pain, ignoring the warning in his mind that said, "Don't interfere." When the structure above her began to crack, he threw his body over hers, shielding her as the collapse came down. When the dust settled, he was barely conscious. The little alien girl reached up with trembling hands, whispering words he couldn't understand. Then everything went dark. Hours passed, days maybe. When he awoke again, he wasn't on the battlefield anymore. He was inside something vast and glowing. A palace, built from living crystal that pulsed with light like the veins of a star. His body was healed, wrapped in linen and strange energy bands. Standing beside him were guards, tall and silver-skinned like the child he'd saved. But their eyes were sharp, cold, suspicious. They said nothing as they led him through the corridors. When the great doors ahead opened, Marcus froze. On a throne carved from pure light sat the Empress herself, mother of the girl he had saved. Her beauty was inhuman, terrifying and divine, her presence a force that made the air itself heavy. She stared at him as though she could see through his soul. "You are the Terran who shielded my blood," she said, her voice echoing like thunder over glass. Marcus bowed slightly, though his instincts screamed that he was standing before something ancient and powerful. "I only did what anyone would have done," he said quietly. The Empress rose, descending the stairs with movements that defied gravity. "You saved the heir to the throne," she said, "and for that, your life now belongs to the crown." Marcus's chest tightened. He had expected gratitude, not ownership. "I'm not yours," he said, steady but respectful. The guards stiffened, their weapons humming. The Empress studied him with an unreadable expression. "Among your kind, you call it freedom," she murmured. "Among ours, it is debt. You carry a life that is not your own anymore." He looked up at her, meeting her gaze without fear. "Then maybe it's time someone taught your kind what freedom feels like." The room fell silent. The Empress tilted her head slightly, intrigued rather than angered. "You speak boldly for a dying species." "We've been dying since the stars were young," Marcus replied. "And somehow we keep surviving." Something changed in her eyes then. A flicker of respect, faint but real. "Perhaps that is why I cannot decide if you are dangerous or sacred," she said softly. "You will remain here until I do." Days turned to weeks. The palace became both a cage and a classroom. Marcus learned the customs of the Lemurian Empire, a civilization older than most suns. The princess, whose name was Sarai, followed him everywhere. She was curious, asking endless questions about Earth, about oceans and rain and laughter. Marcus found himself teaching her about things no alien had ever seen. The feel of wind through trees, the sound of thunder rolling over water. In return, she showed him her world, where light itself obeyed her mother's will and the stars bowed before their fleet. Yet beneath the beauty, Marcus sensed fear. The people worshipped the Empress not out of love, but reverence mixed with terror. He saw how one command could silence an entire hall. And in her presence, even Sarai trembled. One night, When the child fell asleep under the soft glow of the palace lanterns, Marcus whispered to her, "You don't have to be afraid. On my world, leaders serve their people, not the other way around." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe your world was a kinder place." He looked out the window at the dark horizon. "It was," he said, "until it wasn't." The next day, the Council of Nobles gathered. They demanded that the Terran be executed, claiming his survival violated sacred laws. The Empress sat in silence, her fingers clasped before her lips, her expression calm. When the room erupted in anger, she raised one hand, and the air froze. "You forget," she said coldly, "that he saved my daughter. He polluted her." One noble spat. "He touched the air with unworthy flesh." The Empress's gaze burned like a nova. "Then perhaps it is your minds that are polluted." Her voice dropped to a whisper that silenced all. The Terran stays. Marcus stood behind the guards, watching as centuries of fear bowed to one woman's will. Later that night, she came to his quarters alone. "You've changed this court," she said. "They whisper that you've bewitched me." "I didn't mean to," Marcus said. "Maybe they just fear what they don't understand." She stepped closer, her eyes softening. "Perhaps," she said. "But I begin to think you are not here by chance. The galaxy bends around rare souls." Marcus met her gaze, feeling the weight of her words. "Then maybe it's time the galaxy stopped bending and started listening." Over the following months, war found its way back to them. The neighboring Dominion, an empire older and crueler, saw the Empress's compassion as weakness. They sent fleets of shadow ships, dark as black holes, to demand submission. The Council of Worlds declared neutrality, terrified to anger either side. The Empress gathered her admirals and prepared for battle. But the night before the war began, she summoned Marcus again. "You have seen my daughter," she said softly. "You have seen what I have built. Tell me, do you think I can win?" Marcus looked at her, at the exhaustion behind her perfect mask. "You can win," he said, "but you won't. Not like this." She frowned. "Then how?" "By showing them what mercy looks like," he said quietly. "That's the one weapon they don't have." Her eyes narrowed. "Mercy does not win wars." "No," Marcus said, "but it ends them." When dawn came, the skies above Varela burned once more. The Empress's fleet met the Dominions in orbit, and for every Lemurian ship that fell, 10 enemy vessels burned. But it was not enough. The enemy unleashed their planet breakers, weapons capable of unmaking worlds. Marcus stood beside the Empress on the command bridge, watching as the planet's shields flickered under the strain. "It's over," said one of the admirals, but Marcus stepped forward. "Not yet," he said. He accessed the comm channel and broadcast his voice across all frequencies. "This is Captain Marcus Hale of Earth. You came here to crush a world. But what you fear most isn't our strength. It's our heart. You see a mother who defied you, a child you tried to kill, and a soldier who protected life instead of taking it. That's what makes us human. That's what makes us unstoppable." The message spread through the enemy ranks, shaking even their coldest hearts. When the Empress gave the order to stand down, expecting annihilation, the Dominion fleet hesitated, and then, one by one, withdrew. In that silence, peace was born. The Empress turned to Marcus, her expression unreadable. "You've done what my armies could not," she said. "You've made them see." He smiled faintly. "Sometimes words travel farther than weapons." She stepped closer, her gaze filled with something deeper than command. "Then hear my words now," she whispered. "You saved my daughter. You saved my people. You belong to this throne, Marcus Hale, whether as its protector or its king." He froze, realizing what she meant. "I'm no king," he said. "Then be what you are," she replied softly. "Be human, and stay." Years later, under a sky reborn, the Empress stood with Marcus and her daughter at her side as they signed the first treaty between humanity and the Lemurian Empire. The galaxy called it the Accord of Light. The Galactic Council, long corrupt and silent, was forced to recognize that mercy had ended a war that their weapons could not. And across the stars, The name humanity became something sacred, a reminder that even in the darkest reaches of space, compassion was the most powerful force of all. When the dust of battle had finally settled, Marcus Hale found himself no longer among the ruins of war, but inside a vast chamber that felt more like a cathedral than a room. The walls shimmered with slow-moving light, alive like the surface of deep water, and in their glow he saw his reflection, scarred, weary, but alive. His armor had been stripped, replaced by a robe of pale silver fabric that fit too perfectly to be coincidence. He was unarmed, barefoot, and watched by silent guards whose eyes gleamed faintly with luminescent veins. Each carried a weapon that looked like living glass, pulsing as if it breathed. Marcus took one slow breath and forced his soldier's mind to focus. He had been trained to handle interrogation, even diplomacy, but nothing had prepared him for this. Somewhere beyond those doors lay the alien queen whose child he had shielded with his own body. When the doors opened, the air shifted. Incense filled the room, carrying a scent like rain on stone. Two guards led him forward into a hall where the ceiling stretched into shadow. At the far end sat a throne carved from pure crystal that shimmered between colors, reflecting both fire and moonlight. And upon it sat the Empress herself, the ruler of the Lemurian Empire, mother to the girl he had saved. She was radiant and terrifying, her long hair flowing like molten silver, her eyes like the heart of a storm. The hall fell into utter silence as she rose. Every step she took made the ground tremble slightly, as though the palace itself bowed to her. When she stopped before Marcus, she studied him not as a ruler examines a servant, but as a scientist examines something new. "You are the Terran," she said softly, her voice both melodic and cold. "The one who shielded my daughter from the fire." Marcus's throat tightened. "I didn't know who she was," he said. "She was just a child." Her gaze didn't waver. "You gave your body to protect the blood of your enemy," she murmured. "Why?" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Because she was alive. That was enough." The Empress tilted her head slightly, and a faint ripple passed through the assembled nobles. No one ever spoke to her so plainly. For several heartbeats she said nothing, her expression unreadable. Then she stepped closer until he could see the faint glow beneath her skin, veins of light that pulsed in rhythm with her heart. "You are unlike the others of your kind," she said. "The soldiers we captured fought to the death. But you shielded life that was not your own. Do you know what such an act means in our law?" Marcus met her eyes. "I don't." "It means," she said slowly, "that your life is now bound to hers. You carry her debt, and through her, mine. You belong to the throne of Lemuria." The words hit him harder than any bullet. He straightened. "I belong to no one," he said. The guards tensed, their weapons humming, but the Empress raised a hand and they froze. She studied him for a long moment, and then, almost imperceptibly, smiled. "You speak boldly for a species that has no seat among the stars," she said. "Perhaps that is why I find you fascinating." She turned, her robe whispering across the crystal floor. "You will remain within the palace walls. You will not be harmed. You will be studied." Marcus frowned. "Studied? You saved the future of our empire," she said without turning. "And yet you are a mystery. I will know why." Then she walked away, her voice echoing down the hall. "If you try to leave, my guards will end you. But if you stay, you may find that captivity can feel very much like destiny." Days became weeks, and Marcus's cell turned into something else entirely. A private chamber overlooking the city. Beyond the balcony, towers of light reached into the clouds, their surfaces rippling like liquid metal. The city was alive, its people moving in elegant patterns, each step choreographed as though even motion itself were sacred. He spent his hours observing, learning. The Lemurians were ancient, their society built on obedience and perfection. There were no children playing, no laughter in the streets. Every sound was measured, every gesture restrained. It was beautiful, but in a hollow way, like a song without a heart. The only warmth came from the small girl he had saved, Sarai. She visited often, sneaking past her guards, her silver eyes filled with curiosity. She would sit on the floor beside him, tracing shapes on the marble with her glowing fingers, asking endless questions about his home. "What is rain?" she once asked. He smiled faintly. "Water that falls from the sky." Her brow furrowed. "Why would the sky cry?" He chuckled softly. "Because sometimes, even the heavens need to feel." Their bond grew quietly, and the palace whispers grew louder. The nobles didn't understand. They feared his presence, calling him the shadow of mercy. The idea that a human, a primitive deathworlder, as the council called his kind, could influence the royal heir terrified them. Rumors began to reach the Empress. Her advisors urged her to have him sent away, erased, anything to keep her people's faith unshaken. But she refused. "He has done what our kind cannot," she told them. "He gave without reason." When her chief priest warned that such compassion would unravel her reign, she silenced him with a glance. "Then perhaps it deserves to." One night, she came to Marcus's chamber unannounced. The guards bowed and retreated as the doors closed behind her. She stood by the window, the moonlight catching the shimmer of her robe. "Your presence disturbs my counsel," she said softly. "They say I am losing control." Marcus stood slowly. "Maybe control isn't what your people need." She turned, her eyes narrowing. "And what do they need, Terran?" "Hope," he said simply. "Something that makes life more than survival." For a long time she said nothing. Then, with a quiet sigh, she walked toward him until they stood face to face. "You speak as if you have known endless pain," she whispered. "I have," he replied. "But I've also seen what happens when pain is shared. It changes everything." From that night on, something began to shift within her. She found herself thinking of the strange human who spoke to her not as a subject but as an equal. She began inviting him to court discussions, asking his thoughts on matters of morality and mercy. The nobles loathed it. They called him the heretic of flesh, claiming he poisoned the queen's mind with human softness. But the people, the silent millions below, began to whisper his name like a secret prayer. They saw their empress hesitate before passing judgment. They saw light return to her eyes when she looked upon the human who had risked everything for her child. The Galactic Council soon noticed. Rumors of the compassionate queen spread across the stars, unsettling old empires that thrived on fear. They demanded she end her alliance with the human or face isolation. Yet instead of yielding, the Empress invited Marcus to stand beside her at a public gathering. Before the council's envoy, she declared, "This man from Earth shielded my daughter from death. His people are small in number, but their hearts burn brighter than our sun's. I will not cast him aside. If you demand I surrender him, then know this, you will have to destroy me first." The hall fell into stunned silence. For the first time in history, a Lemurian ruler had defied the Galactic Council, not with war, but with loyalty. That night, Marcus stood on his balcony, staring at the stars, knowing the galaxy would never be the same again. Behind him, the Empress appeared, her footsteps soft. "You've made me an enemy of the Council," she said, "and a symbol of rebellion." Marcus smiled faintly. Maybe rebellion was overdue. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've bound your life to mine, Terran. Perhaps it was never my throne that owned you, but your heart that has conquered mine." Outside, the night wind carried the hum of distant fleets preparing for war. The galaxy was changing, and somewhere deep in the Empress's chest, something long forgotten began to awaken. A warmth that even 1,000 years of rule had never given her. She looked at Marcus one last time before walking away, her voice trembling. "You saved my daughter," she said, "but what you've truly saved is me." The dawn that followed was unlike any other in the long history of the Lemurian Empire. The sun rose over towers of crystal and light, but beneath that beauty, the air trembled with unease. News of the Empress's declaration had spread through the stars like wildfire. Across distant worlds, alien governments whispered in panic, and the Galactic Council's chambers were flooded with outrage. To stand beside a Terran, a human, one of the violent primitives once barred from galactic society, was an act no ruler had dared before. On Earth, the few surviving colonies listened in awe as reports streamed in of a queen from another world defying the most powerful coalition in the galaxy for the sake of one man. Marcus Hale, unaware of the storm he had unleashed, stood on the balcony of his quarters watching the city come alive below. For the first time since the war began, he heard laughter, quiet, cautious laughter, echoing through the streets. He didn't know it yet, but his presence had begun to change more than the Queen's heart. It was changing her people. The guards, once distant and mechanical in their duty, had started greeting him with quiet nods of respect. Servants who once avoided eye contact now smiled shyly when they passed. In a civilization that had forgotten what warmth meant, the human had become a spark. But peace never goes unchallenged in the galaxy. That very morning, as the Queen met with her council in the Grand Hall, the light dimmed and the air grew cold. The holographic sigils of the Galactic Council appeared above the throne, projecting a dozen alien faces. Some scaled, some crystalline, some nothing but shifting energy, each radiating anger. The Council Chancellor, a being of golden armor and voice like rolling thunder, spoke first. "You have defied the order of worlds," he thundered. "You harbor a Terran, a species condemned for its chaos. By embracing him, you endanger the balance of peace we have kept for millennia." The Queen sat unmoving, her gaze steady. "Peace built on fear is not peace," she said calmly. "This man saved my daughter, and through that act, he reminded me that our empire has forgotten what honor means." The chamber erupted in protest. "Honor," spat one of the council members, a serpentine creature from the Nidax Dominion. "Humans burned their own skies. They destroyed their own worlds. They cannot be trusted." Marcus, standing silently at the foot of the dais, finally stepped forward. "You're right," he said. "We did destroy ourselves, but we also rebuilt. We learned the hard way, but we do learn. Maybe that's something your council forgot how to do." A murmur spread through the hall like distant thunder. The Queen's eyes flickered toward him, half in admiration, half in fear. The Chancellor's voice rose again. "You would lecture the galaxy, Terran? You, a single soldier of a dead planet." Marcus's voice did not waver. "I'm not lecturing. I'm reminding you. Life doesn't need permission to be worth saving." For a long, tense moment, no one spoke. Then the Chancellor turned his gaze to the Queen. "Very well," he said coldly. "If you will not hand over the human, your world will face judgment. You have one cycle to comply." The transmission ended, and the chamber fell into silence. When the holograms vanished, the Queen remained seated, her fingers tightening around the armrest of her throne. "They will come," she said quietly. "They always do." Marcus nodded. "Then we'll be ready." That night, the city below shimmered with lights not of celebration, but of preparation. The sound of engines filled the air as fleets mobilized, shields rose, and the Queen's banners were raised across the horizon. Yet for all their might, Marcus could feel the weight of doubt pressing on her shoulders. She met him later in the Garden of Light, where glowing vines climbed the walls like living stars. "You should go," she said softly. "They will destroy this world for what I've done. You don't owe us your life." Marcus turned toward her, the night reflected in his eyes. "I didn't save your daughter because I owed you," he said. "I did it because it was right. I'm not leaving now." Her lips parted as if to argue, but no words came. The air between them hung heavy with unspoken things. "You're impossible," she murmured finally. "So are we," he said. "That's why they fear us." The invasion began sooner than expected. The Council's fleet arrived like a curtain of shadow blotting out the stars, thousands of warships descending through the void, their engines roaring like the wrath of gods. The people of Lemuria watched from their cities as the heavens turned red. The Queen stood in her command chamber, her generals surrounding her, but it was Marcus she looked to. "You know war better than any of us," she said quietly. "Tell me how humanity would fight this." He studied the display, A sea of hostile ships, a hopeless battle by any measure, and answered, "We wouldn't fight for victory. We'd fight to make sure they remember why they started this war. Because if they forget that, they lose their soul." She frowned. A poetic answer for a soldier. He met her gaze. Sometimes the hardest fights aren't about winning. They're about showing you can't be broken. The first assault hit like a storm. The sky split open, and beams of plasma rained down on the capital. The palace trembled as shields absorbed wave after wave of energy. From the balcony, Marcus watched the world shake beneath fire. He saw soldiers die holding their posts, civilians fleeing through the glowing streets, and yet, none of them turned on one another. They followed the Queen's orders, calm and united. That unity, he realized, was her strength. The Empress of Lemuria was no tyrant in that moment. She was a mother defending her child, her people, and the fragile hope she had built with a single act of mercy. And when the Council's forces broke through the first defense grid, she didn't retreat. She walked to the balcony where the world could see her, and with her voice broadcast across every channel, she said, "We will not yield. You came to destroy compassion, but compassion cannot die. Even if I fall, my people will rise as one." Her words rippled through the fleet like an earthquake. In the enemy ranks, confusion spread. Some captains hesitated, unwilling to fire on a ruler who spoke not with hate but conviction. And it was then, in that fragile hesitation, that Marcus saw humanity's chance. He turned to her. "Let me speak," he said. "They need to hear something that isn't from a queen. They need to hear it from a man." She nodded once, and moments later, his image was broadcast across the stars. He stood before the cameras, battered and scarred, but his voice was steady. "To those who call us savages," he began, "you're right. We are savage, but not in the way you think. We fight because we care. We bleed because we love. We stand even when we know we'll fall, because somewhere in the ashes, something worth saving always remains. Humanity isn't perfect, but neither are you. Maybe that's what makes us the same." His words hung in the silence that followed, drifting through every fleet, every screen, every heart. For the first time in recorded history, the Council fleet stopped firing. Ships drifted in stillness, as if waiting for someone to make sense of what they had just heard. In that quiet, the Queen stepped forward beside him, her hand finding his, and said into the silence, "Then let this be our answer. We will not fight you. We will not surrender. But we will never again kneel before fear." The transmission ended. The battle did not resume. Instead, the Council fleet began to withdraw, one formation after another, until only the empty sky remained. The Queen turned to Marcus, eyes shining not with triumph, but with disbelief. "You've done what I could not," she whispered. "You've turned their hearts." He smiled faintly. "No," he said, "you did. I just reminded them what it means to have one." That night, the world of Lemuria burned not with war, but with light. The people filled the streets, chanting not the Queen's name, but a single word they had learned from the human, hope. And high above them, in the Palace of Crystal, Marcus Hale stood with the Queen beside the sleeping princess, knowing that the galaxy had changed forever. What began as an act of mercy on a battlefield had become a revolution of the soul, a reminder that even in the cold heart of space, humanity's light could ignite the stars themselves. The aftermath of that day rippled across the galaxy like a quiet storm, invisible yet unstoppable. The stars themselves seemed to hum with new tension, as if the universe had exhaled after centuries of holding its breath. On Lemuria, the fires had been extinguished, and the people walked the streets beneath banners of light that declared a word the Council had long forbidden: freedom. For the first time in recorded memory, the Lemurian Empire celebrated not victory, but peace. The Queen stood on the palace balcony overlooking her capital, the wind sweeping her silver hair as her people chanted her name below. Yet behind that triumphant gaze, a weight pressed against her heart. She knew the Council would not forget, and they would never forgive. The galaxy's rulers had always maintained control through fear, and now that fear had fractured, the act of defiance she and Marcus had made, The simple act of saying no had cracked the foundation of their dominion. Peace, she realized, was not the end. It was only the beginning of a much greater war. One fought not with weapons, but with ideals. Marcus Hale, though, felt none of the glory that others saw in him. He stood in the quiet of his chamber, staring out at the distant horizon where two suns met in a sea of fire. The queen had offered him command of her royal guard, but he had refused. He didn't come here to rule or to serve a throne. He had come to survive, to do one decent thing in a galaxy gone mad. Yet every day, as he walked through the palace and saw how her people smiled again, he wondered if this was what humanity's legacy was meant to be. Not dominance, not conquest, but awakening. He had seen civilizations built on power before. They always fell. But this place was different. The queen's people had learned compassion not through fear of punishment, but through the example of one man who had risked everything to protect a child that wasn't his. That truth burned brighter than any sun. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that the council would strike again. The quiet was too perfect, the peace too thin. And peace, he knew, was always the most fragile thing in the universe. One evening, as the twin suns sank and the city lights flickered like constellations below, the queen joined him on the terrace. She wore no crown now, just a simple robe of white, her presence softer than he had ever seen it. "You stand here every night," she said, her voice low and distant. "Watching, waiting. Do you miss your home that much?" He didn't answer at first. "Home," he said finally, "was a place that burned itself down a long time ago. Now I think maybe I was just looking for another one." She turned her gaze to him, her eyes reflecting the faint light of the stars. "And have you found it?" He looked at her, studying the lines of weariness that ruled her perfect face, the strength and fragility that coexisted within her. "Maybe," he said softly, "but if I have, I know I can't keep it. The galaxy doesn't allow things like this to last." She smiled faintly. "Perhaps that is what makes them precious." The days passed like whispers. Delegations began to arrive from distant systems, lesser worlds emboldened by the queen's defiance. They sought counsel, protection, hope. In the grand halls of the palace, Marcus watched alien leaders bow to the queen not out of fear, but respect. Each day her influence grew, and with it so did the danger. The Galactic Council, furious and humiliated, moved in secret. Reports trickled in, fleets amassing beyond the Veil Nebula, intelligence agents spreading false rumors, attempts to fracture her alliances from within. Marcus warned her, but she refused to act first. "If I strike before they do," she said, "then I am no better than them. Let them come to me." He admired her conviction, but it terrified him. The council didn't deal in honor, they dealt in inevitability. Then came the night the skies turned black. Marcus was woken by the sound of alarms and distant thunder that shook the palace walls. He ran to the command deck where the queen already stood, her face illuminated by the blue glow of holographic displays. "An attack?" he asked. She nodded grimly. "Assassins. Council agents. They've infiltrated the palace." The words barely left her mouth before the doors exploded inward. Armored figures stormed in, weapons blazing with beams of burning light. Marcus moved without thinking, his soldier's instincts taking over. He dove forward, pulling the queen behind cover as the air filled with fire. The guards fell one by one, but Marcus fought like a man possessed, his movements fluid and desperate, every strike precise. He had faced worse odds on dying worlds, but this was different. This wasn't war, it was betrayal. One of the assassins lunged toward the queen, blade drawn, and Marcus threw himself in front of her, catching the strike across his arm before slamming the attacker into the wall. The hall fell silent moments later, smoke rising from broken armor and shattered glass. Marcus's breath came ragged, his body bruised and bleeding, but he was still standing. The queen knelt beside him, her trembling hands hovering over the wound on his arm. "You saved me again," she whispered. He looked at her through the haze of pain, his voice barely audible. "It's starting to feel like a habit." Her lips quivered in a half-smile, but her eyes shimmered with tears. They will never stop, she said bitterly. They will keep coming until they erase everything we've built. Then let them come, he said. We'll just keep rebuilding it. She shook her head. You don't understand. They aren't just after me. They're after you. You've become a symbol, Marcus. The Council fears what you represent. They fear that humanity's defiance might be contagious. Over the following weeks, the attack became legend. The Council denied involvement, but everyone knew the truth. Across the galaxy, smaller civilizations began rising in protest. Worlds once silent began to speak. The Queen's defiance had become a movement, and in the middle of it all stood Marcus, a man who had never wanted to lead, now standing as the living embodiment of hope. But hope came with a price. Late one night, as the city slept beneath a storm of shimmering rain, Marcus found the Queen alone in the throne room, standing before a massive window that opened into the void of space. She turned as he entered, her expression unreadable. "Do you ever think," she said softly, "that we've done something unforgivable?" He frowned. "Unforgivable? We've changed the course of 1,000 worlds," she said. "We've broken the Council's chains, but in doing so, we've started something we can't control." He stepped closer. "That's what change is. You can't control it. You can only guide it." The rain outside intensified, drumming softly against the window. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she whispered, "You should have died on that battlefield, Marcus Hale. And yet, here you stand, defying gods." He smiled faintly. "Maybe gods need defying once in a while." Her laughter was quiet, but real. She turned toward the window, her reflection caught beside his. "When the Council comes again, and they will, I want you far from here. Promise me that." He shook his head. "No, you must," she said, her tone sharp. "You've already given enough. If you die, the fire dies with you." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're wrong," he said gently. "The fire's already everywhere. Even if I fall, it won't go out." Her voice broke then, soft as a prayer. "Why must you always sound like you're saying goodbye?" He didn't answer, and she didn't ask again. Outside, the storm raged on, lightning flashing across the horizon. The Queen stood beside him, silent, her hand brushing against his, neither pulling away. In that quiet, fragile moment, they were not a ruler and a soldier. They were two souls who had found light in each other amid the cold vastness of space. But the galaxy was never kind to love born in defiance. Even as they stood together, far beyond the stars, the Council prepared their final decree. A weapon not of fire or blade, but of silence. A darkness was coming, one that would test not their power, but their faith. And as the thunder rolled through the night, Marcus Hale and the Queen both knew deep down that peace, like all beautiful things, was only borrowed time. The peace that followed was fragile, a candle trembling in a storm that refused to die. In the months after the assassination attempt, the Lemurian Empire had grown quieter on the surface but restless underneath. Entire systems began to question their loyalty to the Galactic Council, inspired by the Queen's defiance and by the story of the human who had shielded a princess with his own body. Across the void, distant colonies painted his likeness on starship hulls, calling him the Guardian of Light. But in the deep halls of the Council, that very name was spoken with venom. The Council's leaders had convened in secret, their vast chamber suspended above a dying star whose core burned black. They spoke in whispers that shook the cosmos. "One man cannot unmake the order of ages," hissed the Chancellor. "He has infected her world with the sickness of humanity. Emotion, mercy, rebellion. That must end." From the shadows, an ancient voice replied, "Then end the world itself." And so the plan began. The Council could not attack openly, not after their fleets had failed to break her. They would erase her quietly. They built a weapon unlike any before. The Null Star, a creation of void matter that devoured light and sound, leaving behind only silence. It could wipe an entire world from the galactic grid without firing a single shot. When it was finished, they cloaked it beyond the Veil Nebula, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Meanwhile, on Lemuria, The queen tried to rebuild her people's hope while the storm brewed unseen. She and Marcus spent long hours in the palace gardens, walking under glowing trees that shimmered like frozen fire. They spoke less of war now and more of what might come after. "What will you do when this is over?" she asked him once. He smiled faintly. "Find a quiet world and disappear." She studied him for a moment. "And if peace never comes? Then I'll keep trying until it does." He meant it. Every morning, Marcus trained her guards, teaching them not just to fight but to think like humans, to protect, to adapt, to care. The queen watched these lessons from afar, fascinated. There was something different in the way humans fought, a strange mix of discipline and heart. They fought not for orders but for meaning. "You lead like someone who has already died," she told him one day. He paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Maybe I did," he said quietly. "Back when Earth burned. Maybe the rest is just borrowed time." She stepped closer, her expression softening. "Then perhaps your borrowed time has purpose again." There was warmth in her voice now, a rare tenderness that slipped through the cracks of her regal armor. For the first time, she smiled not as a queen, but as a woman. But fate, as always, waited in silence. One night, a deep hum passed through the planet, too low for ordinary ears but strong enough to rattle the bones of the ancient palace. The lights flickered, the stars outside dimmed, and every sensor in orbit went dark. In the command room, panic spread like fire. "Communications, gone," shouted an officer. "Long-range sensors failing." The queen entered, her robe flowing behind her like liquid silver. "What is it?" Marcus demanded. The officer turned pale. "It's not a ship. It's something else. Something eating the light." The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a colossal void stretching across the edge of the system. A black sphere absorbing everything in its path. Marcus stared at it, his chest tightening. "The null star," he whispered. "They built a weapon that unravels light itself." The queen turned to him. "Can it be stopped?" He shook his head slowly. "No. It doesn't destroy matter, it erases existence. Once it reaches us, there won't even be ashes left." For the first time since he had known her, the queen faltered. The guards around them fell to one knee, whispering prayers to old gods that could no longer hear them. Marcus stepped forward, placing a hand on her arm. "We can evacuate," he said. "Get the civilians to the outer colonies." She shook her head. "There's no time. Even if we flee, the null star will follow the gravity of life. It will chase us until the last heartbeat." She looked at him then, her eyes glistening with something he had never seen before, fear. "I brought this on us," she whispered, "because I defied them." "No," Marcus said firmly. "You brought hope. That's what they're afraid of." Her gaze steadied. "Then we must protect it, whatever it takes." They worked for hours, coordinating the exodus of children and scholars into transport vessels. Across the planet, cities rose into the air on thrusters as millions fled into orbit. Marcus took command of the defense stations, though he knew there was no defense to mount. The null star devoured faster than light could flee. Soon, the horizon itself began to fade, colors dying, the blue sky turning gray as if reality were draining away. The queen stood beside him in the war chamber, her composure unbroken. "If we can't stop it," she said softly, "then we can at least choose how we meet it." Marcus turned toward her, understanding dawning. "You're planning something." She nodded. "There's one chance. The null star feeds on energy. If we detonate our core reactor inside it, the blast might collapse its field. But it requires manual activation." He shook his head instantly. "No, I'm not letting you do that." "It's not your choice," she said, her voice calm, her eyes already resolute. He stepped closer, anger and desperation rising in his chest. "You think dying will save them?" "Not dying," she whispered. "Becoming something greater. You don't have to prove anything." "Neither do you," she said softly, her hand brushing against his. "Yet here you are, still fighting a war that ended long ago." The silence between them stretched, full of everything neither dared to say. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice breaking. "Then let me go instead." The queen's lips trembled. "You are not mine to lose," she whispered. "You belong to the stars now." Moments later, alarms wailed as the palace trembled. The null star had reached the upper atmosphere. The queen turned to him one last time. "Promise me something," she said. "Tell them what we stood for. Tell them we didn't bow." He reached for her hand, gripping it tightly. "If I live through this, I'll tell the whole galaxy. But if I don't, then let them see it in the light that comes after." Without another word, she turned and strode toward the reactor chamber, her robes trailing like silver flame. Marcus followed until the guards blocked his path. "She ordered us to keep you safe," one said. He tried to push past, but they stood firm. "If you stop her, we all die." His fists clenched, his voice shaking. "She is going to die." But it was too late. Deep beneath the palace, the queen entered the core, an ocean of light and fire bound by containment rings. She placed her hand on the control node, her eyes lifting toward the vast, encroaching darkness above. "You wanted silence," she said softly, her voice echoing through the chamber. "Then hear this." She pressed her hand against the final seal. The core erupted into brilliance, a light so pure it tore through the blackness, ripping the null star apart from within. For one brief moment the galaxy went white. When the light faded, there was nothing but silence. And then, slowly, color returned to the sky. The planet still stood. The palace was in ruins, the air heavy with ash, but life remained. Marcus stumbled through the smoke, calling her name, searching through wreckage until he found her crown lying among the broken crystal, its glow fading. He sank to his knees, clutching it to his chest, his tears lost in the dust. She was gone, but the stars above shone brighter than they ever had before. Across the galaxy, the explosion was seen as a second dawn. The Council's fleets faltered, their authority crumbling. Worlds once enslaved began to rise, their leaders declaring independence under a new banner, the Concord of Light. And at its center stood the name of a human and a queen who had refused to bow. Marcus Hale, the man who shielded a child, became the guardian of her mother's legacy, carrying her story from one world to the next. Wherever he went, the people remembered not the war, but the light. And though the queen's body was gone, her voice lingered in the stars. When the wind passed over the rebuilt palace, it carried a whisper that only Marcus could hear. "You kept your promise." Years passed after the day the stars burned white, and the galaxy healed slowly, like a wound that refused to scar. The Queen of Lemuria became legend, spoken of as both martyr and miracle. Across the new age that followed, her name was carved into monuments, etched into the very data streams that bound worlds together. The children of alien empires recited her final words in schools. "We will not bow." But for Marcus Hale, the man who had lived through the impossible, legend felt hollow. He had walked through the fire and lived, yet part of him had been left behind in that blinding light. Every dawn reminded him of her. Every breath carried her memory, and every night the stars seemed to whisper her name through the void. The galaxy called him the Ambassador of Light, the first Terran ever invited to the Galactic Concord, but he wore that title like a chain. For him, the victory was not peace, it was survival, and survival always came with ghosts. He spent his days on New Terra, a world built on the ashes of the old. It was a place of renewal, green fields spread across the ruins of ancient war zones, blue oceans restored by Lemurian technology. Yet even amid its beauty, Marcus could not find rest. Each evening, he walked the shoreline alone, watching the twin moons rise above the horizon. The sound of the waves reminded him of her voice, soft, commanding, eternal. Sometimes he imagined he could see her silhouette standing over the water, the same way she had stood before her people that final night. "You should be proud," said a voice behind him one evening. It was Lyra, the queen's daughter, now grown, her silver eyes reflecting the same light as her mother's. She had been a child when he shielded her from the fire. Now she was the ruler of the reborn Concord, carrying both her mother's crown and her father's heart. Marcus smiled faintly. Pride is for those who think they deserve it, he said. I only did what needed to be done. Lyra stepped beside him, her long robe brushing the sand. And in doing what needed to be done, she said softly, you changed everything. Under her leadership, the Concord had become what the old council never could, a union of equals, not empires. Humanity had earned its place among the stars not through war, but through empathy. Their colonies no longer fought for dominance but for cooperation. Trade routes connected worlds that had once fired on each other. The weapon ships of the Council had been dismantled, their cores repurposed into orbital gardens. Yet for all that peace, Marcus knew the truth. Peace was a living thing. It had to be protected, nourished, and sometimes fought for in silence. He became Lyra's closest advisor, though she insisted on calling him her friend. Together, they rebuilt what had been lost. But even as the galaxy prospered, whispers began again. Of shadows beyond the edge of known space, of ancient machines awakening in the void. The balance was never permanent, and Marcus knew that the price of light was eternal vigilance. Still, he tried to live if only to honor her. He taught at the Concord Academy, training young explorers and diplomats, teaching them the old lessons of humanity. That courage without compassion is only pride, and mercy is the strongest weapon of all. His students adored him. They listened to his stories of the Iron Sky War and the fall of Lemuria, their eyes wide as he spoke of the queen who had died to save them. Yet he always told those stories simply, without grandeur. She wasn't a god, he would say. She was a mother, a ruler, a person who refused to stop believing in what was right. He never mentioned the nights they had spent in the gardens or the last words they had shared in the flickering light. Some things belong to memory, not history. One evening, after a long lecture, Marcus wandered out into the city square. The streets of New Terra were alive with music and color. Children laughing, vendors shouting, ships rising like comets into the night. Above the plaza, a monument towered high, a sculpture of intertwined figures, one human, one Lemurian, standing together beneath a rising sun. The base bore an inscription written in both tongues. From mercy, light is born. Marcus stood before it for a long time, his reflection caught in the stone. A young woman approached, carrying a small hollow recorder. Sir, she said shyly, is it true you knew the Queen of Lemuria? He nodded slowly. I did. Was she really as beautiful as they say? Marcus smiled faintly. No, he said. She was more. Beauty fades. What she had, never will. The girl thanked him and walked away, leaving him alone with the monument and the sound of the wind. He looked up at the night sky, and for a moment, the stars above shimmered in a way that made his heart stop, like silver eyes watching from eternity. The years weighed on him as time passed. His hair turned white, his body frail, but his spirit never dimmed. Lyra visited him often, though their conversations had shifted from politics to memory. One night, she brought him a gift, a fragment of crystal recovered from the ruins of Lemuria. It still holds her energy, she said. The scientists say it hums when the stars align. Marcus held it in his palm, feeling the faint pulse beneath his skin. It's like she's still here, he whispered. Lyra smiled sadly. Maybe she always was. He looked out the window then, the stars reflecting in his eyes. You've done well, Lyra, he said softly. Your mother would be proud. And you? She asked. Would you rest finally? He laughed quietly. I think I already am. When Marcus Hale died, he died quietly, sitting in his chair by the window of his home overlooking the ocean. The sun was setting, and the waves whispered against the shore. In his hand, the crystal fragment glowed faintly, pulsing one last time before dimming forever. The galaxy mourned. For 3 standard weeks, every world of the Concord dimmed its lights to honor him. Starships stopped in orbit and sent beams of light toward the void, a river of brilliance flowing through the darkness in his name. Lyra herself delivered the eulogy before billions. He was not a god, she said, her voice steady. He was not a soldier. He was not even just a man. He was a reminder, that mercy is the only thing that survives eternity. And so humanity's story changed forever. They were no longer the outcasts of the galaxy but its conscience. The Galactic Concord built a shrine at the edge of the Veil Nebula, where the light of 1,000 worlds converged. At its heart stood two statues, the Queen of Lemuria and Marcus Hale, side by side, their hands almost touching, their gaze fixed on the horizon of stars. Beneath them, a single line of text glowed in endless light. She gave her life to save his world. He gave his heart to save hers. Travelers from across the universe came to see it, and many swore that when the stars aligned, the statues shimmered with living light, as if the Queen and the humans still walked among them. And somewhere beyond the rim of known space, in that vast, endless silence, two souls stood together beneath an unseen sun. One human, one Lemurian. Their hands entwined, watching the galaxy they had saved. There was no war there, no council, no duty. Only peace, eternal and unbroken. She turned to him, her silver hair glowing softly in the light, and whispered, "You kept your promise." Marcus smiled, the stars reflected in his eyes. "You did too." And together, they watched the light they had created fill the universe forever. If you felt the story move your heart, remember to like, comment, and subscribe to Sci-Fi Tales, where the courage of humanity, the strength of compassion, and the light of mercy never fade, no matter how dark the stars may seem.